Hello everyone, I'm Jiang, and welcome back to the channel. The United States has delivered Iran a demand that sounds simple. Publicly declared that the Strait of Hormuz is open to international commercial shipping, and guaranteed that vessels passing through it will not be attacked. But this is not simply a disagreement about shipping lanes. Washington is asking Iran to surrender the strongest source of leverage it still possesses. Iran cannot match the United States aircraft for aircraft. It cannot defeat the American Navy in a conventional battle. And it cannot protect every military installation from another large wave of strikes. But Iran sits beside one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz gives Tehran the ability to make the entire global economy feel the cost of a regional war. That is why the real question is not simply whether Iran will accept America's demand. The real question is whether anyone inside Iran now has enough authority to make that commitment and force every military unit, Revolutionary Guard commander, and armed faction to obey it. Because opening the strait on paper is easy. Keeping it open while missiles are flying, naval forces are mobilized, and Iran's political leadership is divided is something entirely different. Today, we are going to examine why Washington wants a public declaration from Tehran, why Hormuz has become Iran's most valuable strategic weapon, and what could happen if Iran refuses or agrees but cannot enforce its promise. At the end, I will give you the 3 most likely scenarios for what happens next and explain why the most peaceful-looking outcome may still leave the region dangerously close to another war. The American demand appears reasonable at first. Commercial ships should be able to cross an international waterway without being threatened, redirected, or attacked. Oil tankers, container ships, and liquefied natural gas carriers are not merely pieces on a military chessboard. They connect economies across the world. If shipping through Hormuz slows, the effects are not limited to Iran, the United States, or the Gulf states. Energy prices can rise in Europe. Manufacturing costs can increase in Asia. Airlines in North America can face higher fuel bills. Countries dependent on imported oil and gas can experience pressure on electricity prices, transport costs, and inflation. Even consumers thousands of kilometers away can feel the effects at petrol stations and supermarkets. That is what makes the Strait of Hormuz different from an ordinary battlefield. A missile strike against a military facility may have a local effect. A disruption in Hormuz can transmit the economic cost of war across the entire world. Washington is not only demanding that Iran reduce attacks, it wants Iran to make a clear and public commitment. That difference is important. A private assurance can be denied. It can be reinterpreted. It can be described later as informal, temporary, or misunderstood. A public statement creates a visible obligation. If Tehran publicly guarantees safe passage and another vessel is attacked, the United States can argue that one of 2 things has happened. Either Iran deliberately broke its commitment, or Iran's leadership no longer controls the armed forces operating in its name. Both possibilities are dangerous for Tehran. A public statement would also remove one of Iran's most useful tools, ambiguity. Iran has often benefited from uncertainty surrounding attacks, threats, and operations across the region. Was an attack directly ordered by the Iranian government? Was it carried out by a Revolutionary Guard unit? Was it conducted by a local commander? Was it the action of an allied armed group operating independently? Or was it an unofficial warning that Tehran could later deny? This uncertainty allows Iran to apply pressure without always accepting full responsibility. It can send a message while preserving room for negotiation. Washington wants to close that space. It wants Iran to say clearly that the waterway is open, that commercial ships will not be attacked, and that Iranian forces will not impose special conditions on internationally recognized shipping routes. But there is another issue hidden inside the wording. Iran may be willing to let ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That does not mean Iran is willing to accept that it has no special authority over the waterway. Those are 2 different positions. Tehran can argue that it is not closing Hormuz, but merely regulating traffic for reasons of national security. It can ask ships to use particular routes, communicate with Iranian authorities, avoid certain zones, or accept inspections and monitoring. Iran may describe these measures as necessary for maritime safety. The United States sees them very differently. From Washington's perspective, allowing Iran to decide how vessels enter, where they travel, and what conditions they must follow could gradually transform an international waterway into an Iranian-controlled checkpoint. Even without charging a formal fee, Iran could impose an indirect economic cost. Shipping companies may have to pay more for insurance. Tankers may wait longer before entering the strait. Crews may demand additional risk payments. Naval escorts may become necessary. Oil traders may add a geopolitical premium to every barrel passing through the region. Iran may never receive that money directly, but its ability to create danger would make everyone else pay more. That is a form of strategic taxation. The United States, therefore, wants more than an open passage. It wants equal access. It wants ships to use internationally recognized lanes. It wants commercial vessels to move without Iranian approval, Iranian tolls, or Iranian military intimidation. In other words, Washington is attempting to prevent Tehran from converting geography into a permanent system of political and economic control. This is why Hormuz has become so important. For decades, the central issue between Iran and the West was the nuclear program. Negotiations focused on centrifuges, uranium enrichment, inspections, sanctions, and the possibility that Iran might eventually develop the ability to produce a nuclear weapon. But the current conflict has demonstrated that Iran possesses another form of leverage that is more immediate. A nuclear program influences long-term calculations. The Strait of Hormuz can influence the oil market tomorrow morning. Iran does not need to close the waterway completely to achieve an effect. It only needs to make commercial operators believe that the risk of entering has become too high. This is one of the most important features of modern economic warfare. Markets react to probability, not only certainty. A shipping company does not need proof that every tanker will be attacked. It only needs to believe there's a serious chance that one might be. An insurance company does not need a declaration of war before increasing premiums. It only needs evidence that the danger is rising. Oil traders do not wait until the strait is completely blocked. They begin adjusting prices as soon as they believe future supplies may be disrupted. This means Iran does not need to defeat the American Navy. It does not need to sink dozens of ships or permanently seal the strait with mines. It only needs to create enough uncertainty that commercial companies begin restricting their own movement. In that situation, the market partially closes Hormuz on Iran's behalf. Imagine a single tanker is struck. The direct damage may involve one ship, one crew, and one cargo. But the economic consequences expand immediately. Other vessels delay their journeys. Insurance rates increase. Energy companies review their contracts. Governments consider releasing strategic reserves. Airlines anticipate more expensive fuel. Factories begin calculating the impact of higher energy costs. Financial markets react to the possibility of a wider confrontation. The military event may be limited. The psychological and economic effect is global. This is Iran's asymmetric advantage. The United States possesses overwhelming conventional military power. Iran possesses the ability to make the use of that power economically painful for countries far beyond the battlefield. That is why Washington wants Tehran to publicly give up or at least restrain its maritime leverage. But the United States faces a serious problem. Even if Iranian diplomats accept the demand, can Iran's political system actually enforce it? A ceasefire is not simply a document. It is a chain of command. Someone must negotiate the agreement. Someone must sign it. Someone must issue orders to the armed forces, and the people receiving those orders must obey. If one part of that chain is broken, peace can collapse within minutes. Iran's system has always contained competing institutions. There is the elected government, there is the presidency, there is parliament, there is the foreign ministry, there is the regular military, there is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, there are security agencies, clerical institutions, and armed networks with their own interests and influence. These institutions do not always agree. Under a powerful supreme leader, however, they operated beneath a recognized authority. That central authority could manage rivalries, impose limits, and decide which faction ultimately controlled national policy. When that central authority is weakened or removed, the system does not automatically become more moderate. It can become more fragmented. And fragmentation can make war easier to start, but much harder to end. Western. Governments often believe that weakening an enemy's leadership creates an opportunity for diplomacy. Sometimes that is true. A weakened government may become more willing to compromise. But the opposite can also happen. A strong opponent may be hostile, yet still possess the authority to enforce an agreement. A divided opponent may contain many actors capable of destroying peace, but no single actor capable of guaranteeing it. Consider a possible scenario. Iran's elected government agrees to open Hormuz. The foreign ministry negotiates the terms. The agreement is presented publicly as a step towards de-escalation. But one hardline Revolutionary Guard faction believes the deal gives away Iran's greatest source of leverage. That faction attacks a tanker or confronts a commercial vessel. Washington then says Iran has violated the agreement. Iranian diplomats respond that the government did not authorize the incident. The United States concludes that either Tehran is lying or the Iranian state has lost control. American forces retaliate. Iranian hardliners use that retaliation as proof that negotiations were a trap. The government loses credibility. The ceasefire collapses. This is the central difficulty facing Washington. It is not enough to ask, what does Iran want? The more important question may be, which part of Iran has the power to decide? The diplomatic establishment may want sanctions relief. The Revolutionary Guard may want deterrence and regional influence. The elected government may want economic stability. Hardline clerics may fear that compromise will weaken the political system. Military commanders may believe control of Hormuz is the only reason Washington is negotiating at all. Business interests may want oil exports restored. Nationalists may reject any agreement that appears to have been imposed by the United States. Each faction sees a different war. Each faction also sees a different definition of victory. For Washington, victory may mean safe commercial passage, limits on Iran's nuclear program, and an end to attacks against American forces and regional partners. For Iranian diplomats, victory may mean sanctions relief and international recognition. For the Revolutionary Guard, victory may mean proving that Iran can still impose costs on a stronger enemy. For hardliners, simply surviving an American campaign without surrender may be enough to declare success. This is why the American demand is more dangerous than it first appears. Washington believes it is asking Iran to open a waterway. Many in Tehran may see the demand as an order to surrender the weapon that prevented Iran from being completely isolated and defeated. If Iran agrees without receiving anything meaningful in return, it risks losing its bargaining power. If Iran refuses, it risks another wave of American strikes. And if Iran agrees but cannot control every armed faction, one incident could destroy the entire diplomatic process. The next stage of this conflict may therefore be decided not by a formal declaration from Washington or Tehran, but by the actions of a single military commander, missile unit, patrol boat, or armed faction that believes peace threatens its interests. This brings us to the larger bargain beneath the Hormuz dispute. The waterway is not the only issue. The United States is also focused on Iran's nuclear capabilities, uranium stockpile, missile forces, and regional networks. Iran wants sanctions relief, access to international markets, the ability to export oil, and guarantees that the United States will not simply take Iranian concessions and then launch another attack later. The two sides are bargaining over several forms of leverage at the same time. Hormuz is Iran's geographic leverage. Its nuclear program is technological leverage. Its missiles are military leverage. Its oil exports are economic leverage. American sanctions are financial leverage. U.S. air power is military leverage. Neither side wants to surrender its strongest cards before the other side moves first. Washington wants Iran to guarantee safe passage and reduce its nuclear and military options before receiving major sanctions relief. Tehran fears that once it opens Hormuz transfers sensitive nuclear material and reduces military pressure, the United States will have less reason to honor its side of the bargain. Iran can point to previous agreements that collapsed after political changes in Washington. The United States can point to previous Iranian commitments that were followed by new military activity, proxy attacks, or nuclear advances. This is not simply a disagreement over terms. It is a sequencing problem. Who acts first? Who verifies the action? What happens if the other side does not respond? Can concessions be reversed? Who determines whether a violation has occurred? And who has the authority to punish a violation without immediately restarting the war? This is where regional mediators become important. Oman has a long history of carrying messages between Washington and Tehran. Qatar maintains relationships across the region and often acts as an intermediary when direct communication is politically impossible. Pakistan has a strong interest in preventing a major war near its borders and has positioned itself as a potential diplomatic channel. Turkey also wants to avoid a conflict that could disrupt energy markets, regional trade, and the wider balance of power. These states can help transmit proposals. They can clarify language. They can suggest compromises that allow both sides to avoid public humiliation. For example, Iran could issue a statement supporting safe commercial navigation without using the exact language demanded by Washington. The United States could announce a limited sanctions waiver. At the same time, an international maritime body could monitor shipping routes. Naval hotlines could be created to prevent misunderstandings. Incidents could be investigated before either side launches retaliatory strikes. Sanctions relief could occur in stages as Iran demonstrates compliance. Iranian restrictions could also be removed in stages rather than through one dramatic declaration. These arrangements would not require trust. They would attempt to replace trust with verification. That distinction is essential. Washington does not need to believe Iran has become friendly. Tehran does not need to believe the United States has abandoned its strategic goals. Both sides only need a system in which violations can be identified before they become excuses for another war. But mediators have limits. They can carry agreements. They cannot create command authority inside Iran. They cannot guarantee that every Revolutionary Guard unit obeys the foreign ministry. They cannot guarantee that Washington will remain patient after another ship is attacked. They cannot prevent hardliners on either side from using a minor incident to destroy negotiations. The success of diplomacy, therefore, depends on whether an agreement can produce real control, not merely acceptable language. There are three main ways this crisis could now develop. The first possibility is that Iran accepts the American demand. Tehran publicly states that the Strait of Hormuz is open to commercial traffic and promises that vessels will not be attacked. Washington presents this as proof that military and economic pressure worked. Shipping companies regain confidence. Insurance costs begin to decline. Oil prices stabilize. Negotiations over sanctions, nuclear material, and future security arrangements resume. This is the most positive scenario, but Iran would almost certainly require something in return. A completely one-sided declaration would be difficult for the Iranian leadership to defend at home. Hardliners would describe it as surrender. The government would therefore need to present the decision as an Iranian initiative rather than an American victory. Tehran might say it is guaranteeing maritime safety under its own regional security policy. Washington might reject Iran's legal argument, but accept the practical result. Both sides would then claim success. Iran would say it protected navigation without surrendering sovereignty. The United States would say it forced Iran to reopen the strait. Commercial ships would begin moving more freely. The immediate crisis would ease. This kind of diplomatic ambiguity can be useful. Sometimes peace survives because both governments are allowed to tell different stories about the same agreement. But the weakness would remain. If Iran's chain of command is divided, the public promise could be tested by the first serious incident. The second possibility is that Iran refuses. Tehran could, argue that Washington has already violated previous commitments and therefore cannot demand unilateral guarantees. Iran might insist that it has the right to protect its coastline, monitor shipping, and restrict vessels connected to hostile military activity. It could continue using approved routes, inspections, warnings, or selective pressure against particular ships. The United States could respond with additional strikes against Iranian coastal systems, naval bases, missile launchers, and command centers. Iran could retaliate against American bases, Gulf infrastructure, or commercial shipping. This is the most visibly dangerous outcome. A cycle of attack and retaliation could begin very quickly. The United States would likely dominate the conventional military confrontation, but Iran would attempt to spread the economic and political costs across the region. It could increase the danger to shipping without formally declaring Hormuz closed. It could threaten energy infrastructure. It could activate allied armed groups. It could launch missiles and drones against regional targets. The goal would not necessarily be to defeat the United States directly. It would be to make the war too expensive, too unpredictable, and too politically damaging to continue. The danger is that both sides may believe escalation will improve their negotiating position. Washington may think additional strikes will force Iran to compromise. Tehran may think greater disruption will force the United States to offer better terms. If both sides make that calculation simultaneously, the conflict can expand even when neither side wants a full regional war. The third possibility is that Iran gives a partial promise. This may be the most realistic scenario. Tehran could declare support for safe navigation, but refuse to use Washington's exact wording. It could promise not to attack peaceful commercial vessels while preserving the right to confront ships it claims are supporting enemy military operations. It could allow broad access while still insisting on Iranian security procedures. It could reject the idea that every ship, including Israeli-linked vessels, should receive equal treatment. It could deny responsibility for attacks carried out by supposedly independent groups. This would produce an agreement that is neither complete peace nor open war. Washington might call Iran's statement insufficient, but delay immediate military action. Mediators would continue negotiating. Commercial ships would move, but cautiously. Insurance costs would remain elevated. Naval forces would stay on alert. Iran would preserve some leverage. The United States would avoid a larger conflict, but the entire arrangement would remain vulnerable. One attack, one misunderstanding, or one disputed inspection could collapse it. This kind of unstable compromise may last longer than expected because it gives both sides something valuable. Iran avoids visible surrender. Washington avoids the economic consequences of a major escalation. Regional governments avoid choosing sides in a wider war. Energy markets avoid a complete shutdown. But stability based on ambiguity has a price. Every ship becomes a possible crisis. Every naval encounter becomes a test of the agreement. Every unexplained explosion creates pressure for retaliation. Every faction can attempt to manipulate events. The region may appear calmer while remaining only one mistake away from war. My assessment is that Iran is unlikely to fully accept Washington's demand without receiving a significant and immediate concession. Hormuz has become too valuable to Tehran. It is more than a shipping route. It is protection against military inferiority. It is a source of bargaining power. It is a way to involve the global economy in a conflict that might otherwise remain concentrated inside Iran. Tehran may offer a carefully worded commitment to maritime safety. It may cooperate with Oman, Qatar, Pakistan, or Turkey. It may restrain some naval and missile units. It may accept international monitoring. But Iran will try to preserve uncertainty over its long-term authority in the Strait. The United States, meanwhile, will continue demanding a public guarantee because it needs more than a temporary reduction in attacks. Washington wants to know who is responsible. It wants a commitment that can be measured, and it wants a basis for holding Iran accountable if another incident occurs. The greatest immediate danger is not necessarily a planned decision by either government to begin a larger war. It is an event that reveals the gap between official diplomacy and actual military control. If another commercial vessel is attacked, Washington may conclude that Iran's promise was meaningless. If Tehran says the attack was carried out by an uncontrolled faction, the United States may decide that the Iranian state is incapable of enforcing any agreement. In either case, the pressure for military retaliation will be enormous. That is why the most important question is no longer simply whether Iran will open the Strait of Hormuz. The most important question is whether Iran still has a single political authority capable of keeping it open. Because wars do not end merely when the two sides become tired. They end when leaders can make commitments, enforce them, and convince their own forces that peace is preferable to another round of escalation. The United States can demand that Iran open Hormuz. It can threaten further military action. It can apply sanctions. It can build an international coalition around freedom of navigation. But Washington cannot create a unified Iranian chain of command from the outside. And Iran cannot expect the world to accept promises that its own armed factions may ignore. The Strait of Hormuz has therefore become a test of something much larger than maritime security. It is a test of whether Iran remains a state capable of making and enforcing strategic decisions. It is also a test of whether the United States can turn military superiority into a political settlement. Winning an air campaign is not the same as winning a war. Destroying military targets is not the same as creating a stable peace. And forcing an opponent to issue a statement is not the same as ensuring that statement will be obeyed. The next phase of this confrontation may not begin with a dramatic declaration. It may begin with a commercial vessel entering a disputed route. It may begin with an Iranian patrol boat approaching too closely. It may begin with a radar operator misreading a movement. It may begin with a missile launched by a commander who believes the diplomatic leadership has betrayed the country. That is how unstable conflicts expand. Not always through grand strategy, but through small actions inside an environment where trust has disappeared and every side expects the worst. So, should Iran accept Washington's demand and publicly guarantee unrestricted commercial passage? Or would doing so mean surrendering its strongest negotiating weapon before receiving reliable American guarantees? Can the current Iranian leadership control the Revolutionary Guard and every armed faction operating around the strait? And can the United States accept a compromise that keeps Hormuz open without completely eliminating Iran's influence? Share your analysis in the comments. The strongest argument is not simply that one side is right and the other is wrong. The strongest argument will explain how an agreement can actually be enforced after it is signed. Subscribe for serious geopolitical analysis, international news, war strategy, and predictions about the forces reshaping the Middle East and the wider world. In the next video, we will examine why Iran may now consider control of the Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz more strategically valuable than parts of its nuclear program, and why that shift could permanently change future negotiations with the United States. This content is intended for educational, informational purposes only. It is based on publicly available reporting and geopolitical analysis. Developing events, diplomatic positions, and military claims may change as new information emerges. This video does not constitute political, financial, or military advice. Thank you for watching. I'm Jiang, and I'll see you in the next video.